I am Sarah Chapman, and I'm the executive director of the nonprofit Media Burn Archive, which is based in Chicago. Media Burn collects, produces, and distributes documentary video. Oh, sorry, if everyone could try to stay muted. Hi, Gordon. If we could just try to have everyone stay muted while so we can hear audio. It'll be very interactive later, but just while we're doing introductions and stuff, try to keep yourself muted. And yeah, so MediaBurn's mission is to use archival media to deepen context and encourage critical thought through a social justice lens. And this event is part of an ongoing free series called Virtual Talks with Video Activists, which examines the way that media production can spark social change. Our next event will be a discussion with the founder of Paper Tiger Television, Dee Dee Halleck, on December 17th. And we are so excited about tonight's program. Tonight, we're joined by Jacqueline Stewart and Justin Williams from the Southside Home Movie Project, along with independent filmmaker Ashley O'Shea. They recently partnered to include archival home movies from Chicago in O'Shea's award-winning film, Unapologetic. They will share clips from the film and from the Southside Home Movie Project collections that O'Shea explored, and we'll discuss ways that archives and filmmakers can partner to create social impact. They'll also talk about evolving perspectives on documenting movements, the act of filmmaking as a way to insert marginalized communities into the archive, the value and specificity of local Chicago archives, and more. So our first speaker will be Ashley O'Shea, who is a DP and documentarian based in Chicago, whose work focuses on illuminating marginalized voices. She's produced work for national brands, including Lifetime, Ford Motor Company, Boost Mobile, KQED, and Doc Martens. Most recently, she filmed the final episode of Doc Martens' Tough As You series, starring the band Phony People, accruing over 65,000 views on social and web. In 2019, she co-produced the Chicago episode of KQED's award-winning series, If Cities Could Dance, which became one of their most viewed episodes to date. Her work also appeared in the critically acclaimed Lifetime docuseries, Surviving R. Kelly. Tonight, she is going to share some clips from her new feature documentary film, Unapologetic. After 2 police killings, Black millennial organizers challenge a Chicago administration complicit in state violence against its Black residents. Told through the lens of Janae and Bella, 2 fierce abolitionist leaders, Unapologetic is a deep look into the movement for Black lives, from the police murder of Rekia Boyd to the election of Mayor Lori Lightfoot. And again, I'm so excited to have Ashley speak, and we're gonna have 3 different speakers throughout the night. We're gonna have a lot of time for questions, so definitely whenever you have a question, put it in the chat, raise your hand, we can stop and talk. But while people are talking, please keep yourself muted so that we can all hear. And with that, I would like to welcome Ashley O'Shea.
Thank you, Sarah, for that very gracious introduction. And I'm just glad to be here with both Media Burn and Southside Home Movie Project. I definitely scoured both of your sites during the production of the film, so I'm glad that we could have this discussion. As Sarah said, I'm an independent filmmaker and cinematographer based here in Chicago. Been working here for about 5 years. And over the course of those years, I was directing and DPing and producing this film, Unapologetic, that really grew out of a moment of resistance, Black young people resisting here in Chicago around the death of 22-year-old Rekia Boyd, and then subsequently the death of Laquan McDonald. And through the film, we follow 2 young Black queer activists, Janae Bantu and Bella Baz. So it's really like an intimate portrait, coming of age story about them within the movement for Black lives, but it's also, looking at how the movement here transformed the city over that time. And so that, with that, in wanting to focus on Black queer feminist perspectives, I knew that I wanted to reach into the archive, because I think something that I was seeing in both movement spaces and educational spaces was a lack of conversation about, where we've come from, how cyclical a lot of what we're learning in movement spaces can be, and even the presence of Black women and feminist voices historically But I from conversations and dialogues with people, I knew that was, that was something that just wasn't being represented correctly, but I knew that it existed. And so, yeah, I'm not sure how far into, I guess I'll talk a little bit about how we landed on what you'll see in the clip. Um, but basically, we really wanted to give visibility both to historically to people that have been in movement spaces, but we also wanted to reflect the Black experience here in Chicago. And we were very specific about, just making the decision to focus on Chicago. And so that's when I started to learn more about Media Burn and the Southside Home Movie Project, and really was able to find some beautiful clips from different collections about Black joy and experience. And so that's something that we integrated into this clip that you're going to see. And so I'll let that play now, and then we can talk more about it afterwards.
Mic check! Mic check! Mic check! While you are here, celebrating over brunch, CPD gone down, CPD gone down. Two of our beloved community members, Mayor Emanuel, thinks more tasers, and more money should go to the police. While you are here, celebrating over brunch, black families are struggling to keep themselves safe from CPD. These are some of the names of the men, women, and children killed by the police. Tiara Thomas, 30. Say her name. Chandra Reaver, 48.
Say her name.
India Cajun, 48. Say her name. Sandra Bland, 28. Say her name. Tear down Babylon, black people are the bomb. We reign. We come.
Director of Operations here. This guy right here was real sarcastic with me. This lady as well, as I was trying to get them out of here. So they just disrupted the lunch of about 200 people.
Okay, well, if there needs, keep discussing.
Black people are the bomb. We reign. We come.
What is this helping though? That's my question.
It's very important.
Really, to this everyone's brunch? No, we all have TV. We don't watch the news.
Now we return to Chicago.
As violence continues to
Back
be
in
topic
2012,
A
when
in
he shot and
Chicago.
killed 22-year-old
Video
Makia
showing
Blake.
17-year-old Laquan McDonald being shot 16.
Breaking news, another Black death. We often peep the slightest of hand. The Black death used as cape. The draping of our people to your cause. This is a story about that magic, about the historical, the unlikely, rarely reported facts about leaders and communities like ours, about how much they fail and succeed, about how Black they are, how queer they are. When you take enough L's, you refuse to surf, but eventually, if you stay here long enough, you'll plant your feet and stay upright. This is our city. But when you expect folks who you've held back for centuries to say sorry, I'm afraid you'll find us rather
Hold up. I need this shit to
unapologetic.
Hold up.
Great. Well, sorry to tease the film to you all, but yes, that is about the first 3 minutes of the whole film. And so, as you see, we went from this verite scene of young Black people disrupting brunches on the north side and really use that as a bridge into trying to set a context for the whole film through this spoken word piece. And so instead of, I guess, matching visuals like from the setting that we filmed the spoken word in, we decided, Ruben, who I think is in here as well, my editor, we decided to integrate these archival pieces and really not try to be so on the nose about the wording of everything, but try to, despite the Black Death and everything that's really kind of surrounding the Black experience here in Chicago, we really wanted to counter those words with images of joy and laughter. And, both of these collections were really just home movies, as you'll hear from Jacqueline and Justin, but they speak volumes to the experience in the 1960s here in Chicago. And, I hope that when people from Chicago watch it that have been here a long time, that they can recognize, different spaces or locations and feel like, they're a part of that connected history. I don't know if I'm supposed to say more now, but I will hand it back over to Sarah.
Yeah, I mean, someone has already, Anne Manikas has already asked that they saw Unapologetic on the festival circuit, but where is it available to stream now?
Yes, so we actually just finished our last festival run for the year. Unless you live in Quebec, we're currently playing the Image Nation Festival there virtually. And we'll also have a free virtual screening on December 8th with Soft Cage Films, and I can link it in the chat. So that one you can receive the link beforehand, and then we'll have like a Q&A later. But yeah, so that's the most recent, but there will be more screenings and opportunities in 2021 as well.
I think that we're going to talk about this a lot more with Jacqueline and Justin, but I guess one thing that we had talked about a little bit beforehand was I wondered what your experience was like with trying to find those intimate community images of the Black community in Chicago, and what kind of like success or failure you had outside of Southside Home Movie Project.
Yes, it was definitely a journey to get to those clips. I think before we really actually didn't have Chicago specific imagery, and we started to get a lot of feedback, or not a lot, but we started to get pointed feedback that, it could really help us push that narrative better if we settled on Chicago archival. And so up to that point, I had probably taken the path of least resistance and, scoured news websites, the CBSs and the NBCs and things like that, to just like try to find images of Black resistance. But, once we started to hear that feedback, we just talked about really putting forward a concerted effort to try to find Chicago specific archival. I think in talks with Jacqueline, maybe a couple years back, I knew about the Southside Home Movie Project. And I think I reached out to her and Sabrina just to ask like how to access it. And it's wonderful that you can preview all of the clips, digitized online. We also spent a lot of time looking at media burn clips, as well as, I'm forgetting the other one. Forgetting the other one. I'll remember. There was one other Chicago resource, like archival resource. If anyone remembers, just say it. But
the Chicago Film Archives, maybe? Chicago
yes,
Film Archives?
Yes, CFA. Yeah. So those were. I think because I probably heard about media burn through Gordon, and then I actually used to work with someone who works at CFA. So because I already had those connections, like I knew about these resources, but I also, like, even then, like I said, I still had to kind of go down the path of like, how do I get access to this? How do we license this? Or even like being able to download the clips so that we could audition them in the cut before we move forward with licensing or got to the picture lock stage. So it was really a great just like learning experience to learn about the Chicago archival landscape. It required a lot of, patience and persistence because, not only through like trying to, when you're thinking about archival, I think a lot of times you're thinking very specific images, but that's not always what you have to figure out what those keywords are that will land you on that right footage. So it was just like a lot of watching the entire clips, 20, 30 minutes, especially with the home movie project. A lot of times, people are just documenting their lives. They're not documentary filmmakers. So, figuring out which parts you could kind of just skip through. But yeah, there was just like a lot of visibility around the 1960s, around, MLK coming here, but also the riots after his assassination, around the presence of the Black Panthers. So those kind of themes kept rising back to the top. And, luckily within that, we were able to find something that worked for the film.
Does anyone have any questions before we move on? We're obviously you're gonna be able to talk to Ashley throughout the night, but if anyone wants to ask any questions now, we can do that. And I don't see anyone, so I'm gonna move on and introduce our next speaker, who is Southside Home Movie Project's founder and director, Jacqueline Stewart. And after she talks, we're going to have archivist and project manager Justin Williams from the Southside Home Movie Project. Southside Home Movie Project is a 5-part initiative to collect, preserve, digitize, exhibit, and research home movies made by residents of Chicago's Southside neighborhoods. They aim to build an alternative, accessible, visual record, filling gaps in existing written and visual histories, and ensuring that diverse experiences and perspectives of Southsiders will be available to larger audiences and to future generations. So with that, Jackie Stewart is going to talk a little bit more about the organization and their work.
Thanks, Sarah. It really means a lot to be here. And I just want to say it's great to see the faces of so many dear friends, or names if your cameras are not on, and to see that you're doing okay, because it's been a long time. So thanks for being here. And thank you, Ashley, for consulting our archive and using the material. It had always been the hope that this would be a resource, not just for scholars, but also for artists and for activists. And you combine, both of those things. So it's deeply meaningful that you found some meaning in the archive for you and for your work. We really feel honored that we have footage and the families that we work with have footage in your film. So I founded the Southside Home Movie Project in 2005 for 2 different reasons initially. First, because as a film historian, it just became really clear that the ways that we have been thinking about film history has really not paid attention to the massive amounts of non-theatrical film and video work that has been made since the beginning of these media. So, there's an international movement looking at so-called orphan film, orphan media, and home movies are a big part of that. And as a native Southsider, it really seemed to me that if we were to have a project that really focused on that particular area, that we could really dig deeply into community histories and networks and build an archive, as Sarah said, that could really provide an alternative visual record of a set of communities that have been, sometimes ignored, sometimes maligned, just by and large misrepresented. And home movies have the capacity to, I think, illuminate people about details of everyday life, both in the things that you see in the films, but also in the ways that people shoot these films, the love and the care that families bring when they're documenting their loved ones, their homes, their travels, and so on. So I find these films to be magical. And one thing that is really just never ceases to amaze me is that when presented in the right ways, much to the shock of many of our donors who say, who would want to see my home movies? People really enjoy watching other people's home movies and find resonance in the images. So at the University of Chicago, which has a long and very problematic history with its surrounding communities, this became a project that was actually starting to do some of the kind of truth and reconciliation work that this institution needs to do. We would have screenings where families that were located not too far away from each other geographically, like, you know, Bronzeville and Bridgeport, would show their movies together in a program and be like, oh my God, my mom had that same couch, or, you know, whatever, because it's mostly just middle class footage. But these conversations could be sparked through home movies among people who were, you know, not interacting with each other due to the racial codes of this city. So it's for me, an intervention in terms of film scholarship, and then it's also a really important community engagement project. And the more that we collected and started to share this work, more and more like documentary filmmakers were coming to us, because like Ashley said, people were not finding the specificity of the kinds of images of like mid-century African-American life in particular. Our archive does not just have African-American families, because the South Side does not just have Black populations, but that footage in particular is really unique. So I think it's really important for us to go to another thing that Ashley talked about, which is like searching this material, cataloging the material. We don't just digitize the films, but we really try to work with the students who work with us, and in our screenings, capture some of that everyday detail in the cataloging itself. So if you go to our portal, which I'm sure Sabrina is gonna put in the chat, you can look up cars, shot by car, like when people are shooting while they're driving, trees. We worked with some young people early on in the project who were fascinated by the food and drink in the films, you know, like, oh, there's another Coke bottle, like bottles of Coke. That was super interesting to them. There's real granularity, and the catalog is just an ongoing project, because we obviously don't want to follow conventional cataloging practice with this footage. We want to hear from people what they'd be looking for, and then have the catalog address that, rather than assume that we know, or just stick to the basic stuff of year and neighborhood and so forth. So I think the last thing I want to say before throwing over to Justin is, actually showing our trailer and then throwing it over to Justin, is that there's real value, obviously, in some of the footage that we have that is attempting to document historical moments, like protests. Like some of that is explicit in the footage. But I would say that so much of especially the African-American footage, just constitutes like a performance of resistance in its own right, because it's showing Black people loving each other and succeeding, right? The things that we're proud of. And that in itself is a kind of, you know, a political statement. So I love that Ashley was not just using the footage of protest when she came to our archive, but found that some of this everyday footage was also serving a really important purpose of affirming Black lives. So we have like a 2-minute trailer for the project, and maybe we could look at that now.
The crowd here in Chicago at the festival, and here it is downtown, Sears Town, and the crowds.
This is the 4th of July. We're all out here having a picnic here. And in the year 1980,
Well, that's it for today. She said all that can be said. But that's all right. You'll be back. Tell them you'll be back.
I'll be back.
That's right. And we're signing off.
I think unless Jackie had more to say, we're going to shift over to Justin now. And Justin is going to show some specific collections from the archive and talk about them a little bit more.
Thanks, Sarah. It's a pleasure to be here tonight with everyone. What amazing introductions from Jacqueline and from Ashley about the Southside Home Movie Project, the ways we were able to collaborate with Unapologetic film, which looks amazing. I'm so excited. I was at like 4 or 5 before we started tonight. Now I'm at 10 or 11. So I can't wait to open up the discussion, and I'll quickly get out of the way and just introduce the films. And so what I will be showing are the 2 film reels or selections from them, truly, that Ashley, sampled for Unapologetic, which hopefully you'll be able to recognize some of the images as we play them. The first one is from the Osborne collection, which was actually a donation by a collector, Nicholas Osborne, from a reel that he found actually in a thrift shop. This reel contains footage from the entire year of 1963, featuring events such as the Lake Meadows Arts Fair, the NAACP March and Memorial for Medgar Evers, the Bud Billiken Parade, and also the 1963 public school boycott, and even a Halloween party at Rosenwell Apartments. Merle Evers, who you will see, receives the 48th Spin Guard Medal, awarded posthumously to her husband Medgar Evers, as a NAACP's 54th annual convention. The second clip that you'll see is from the Patton Collection, one of the largest single-family collections in our archive. This reel contains footage from the East Garfield Park neighborhood immediately following the 1968 uprisings after the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Army vehicles and police officers are present as firefighters hose down smoking buildings, and Garfield Park residents sit with their belongings and go about daily life as best as possible. It includes rare footage of the Wall of Respect, a mural first painted in 1967 by the Visual Arts Workshop of the Organization of Black American Culture in Grand Boulevard. The building has since been torn down. And with that, I think we can just play the images and have a discussion.
I guess we could be talking, right, with this, and we don't have to be perfectly silent. Like sometimes we have music, and at our screenings, we definitely invite people to ask questions while the footage is running, or when you notice things like, hey, it's Petrillo Bandshell.
Yes.
That was at
Yes.
31st and South Park, now King Drive, where the march was happening. So please don't feel like you have to be silent because the footage is silent.
I remember the band shell.
It was Al Raby in the march.
Mm-hmm. Hey, Judy.
And now we're seeing the
Hello,
Bud
Jackie.
parade. Hi, Judy. Yes, thanks for the invitation. Zoom is so weird, the distance gets between us. But one thing that I left out was that this original film is 27 minutes and 30 seconds. And so some of these cuts were made actually by the filmmaker as they chose which scenes they wanted to record. And then where you see some of the kind of like when it goes to black, that is me intentionally taking us further down the film reel so that you can get a sense of the breath that is covered.
That's Pekin Cleaners.
Yeah.
And that's you know what that is? Those are the Masons.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
And you see those beautiful gray stones. So that's also South Parkway.
Are there any, or were there any South Side camera stores whose business records, if they still exist, might lead you to other home movie makers in those decades on the South Side as a way of accessing perhaps other collections?
That's a great question. When we conduct oral histories with the donors of material, and I've only heard people talk about downtown camera shops, not any South Side camera shops, but that hasn't always been a deliberate question that we ask. It would be miraculous, but I don't get, miracles are possible. It would be miraculous to find business records of that's a fantastic research suggestion. I appreciate it.
Well, Central Camera.
Yeah.
Let's ask on.
Exactly.
Yeah. Just recently I was in the office, and a lot of the new reels that we received, it is kind of interesting to see that even if these shops don't still exist, but families are going to the same developer, they're going to the same camera shop to buy film over a decade or so. So if some of these shops do exist, whether in Chicago and other regions of the US, which when I was in St. Louis, recording stories around the Michael Brown, not for Southside Movie Project, but for a different organization at the time, around the Michael Brown Memorial, there was a camera store that did date back many decades, and it was a resource like that for many people.
Well, now what is this?
So now we're seeing a bit of the 63 school boycott.
I'm pretty sure my mother was in it.
And Gordon, you said that you also came to the Southside Home Movie Project for footage. I'm not sure if we include any of the shots that you ended up selecting.
Muted. Yeah, we had stuff from the Southside Home Movie Project in boycott, which was of course around the 63 boycott.
Mm-hmm.
And you said the person found this in a thrift shop?
Well, he's a collector, so he's collecting films everywhere all the time. Yeah, but that's where this reel was located. And when we started the project, he was like, "Oh, I've got a Southside reel," and it has just been amazingly generative to be able to share this one reel with so many people.
Wow. I remember that band shell. I used to love it.
Now we're seeing the patent collection reel, which was labeled 250 feet.
Oh my goodness.
Riot film.
The fire's still burning.
Yeah, incredibly so.
Are Gian or Jeanette here?
I was hoping they were joining us. I hadn't seen
Yeah.
them walk through the door, as they would say, you know.
We thought a couple of family members might join us. They might still join.
Oh,
I remember that. I remember how they used to make fires out of those barrels. Oh, look at the hamburger sign.
And so again, this film is 17 minutes.
That's Henry's, I think.
Henry's?
Henry's driving. Yeah, I think so.
Where was this
South
shot?
side. Yeah.
It's on the west side.
Well, there were a few of them.
This was right after this was during the King riots, right? Correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Right after.
Not too far from Madison and Kedzie.
Wow.
That's the opening shot to this reel.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Wow, that's right.
So I don't know, Justin, if you were going to say something about Robert Patton.
Please.
Yeah, so Robert Patton was the first African-American, I don't know the order of these things, lieutenant, then sergeant. Wow, you guys will know the order, then captain. First African-American to hold those positions of any state police force in the country.
Wow.
And so we assume that his job, right, his position is what enabled him to come in, you know, with the camera and move around as he did, taking these images while the National Guard was occupying or helping or whatever on the West Side. So most of the Patton footage shoots the Patton family's activities and their international travels. But this one reel on the box that said riot, and this is what we got.
Yeah, this was really special to me because I think even less than the South Side, there's even less documentation of the West Side of Chicago.
Yes.
And with one of our subjects, she's, you know, from the Austin neighborhood right off of Madison. So once I found this, it was just astounding to see, you know, places, streets and storefronts now, like how they look during these riots. It was really moving.
Yeah. It's very different from what the Red Squad would shoot.
How so,
So he's not spying on people.
Yeah.
No, this is he's documenting these incidences and not looking to spy on people, which is very different from, you know, what you would consider someone in the military or the police to be surveilling people. Interesting.
Standard Oil.
And when we were sharing some of this in a recent episode of Spinning Home Movies, which is one of the a virtual program that we created in the spring for obvious reasons. I believe, and you know, Justin, Sabrina, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think someone was noting that some of these buildings that burned, you know, things that disappeared, they, you know, the neighborhood hasn't recovered from
That's right.
this destruction.
Not at all.
Rebuilt.
Yeah, this reel, as folks can imagine, and I think Edwin put into the chat, the images resonate completely with this past year.
Mm-hmm.
And we were lucky enough to collaborate with musical artists that wanted to peer underneath the layers of this. Even this image right here, this is the actual way that it was cut and shot. That contrast, a lot of artists went into of like, what does it mean to still have each other the day after, to still survive and try to think of what it means to be in this country, and find some bit of joy. And so you'll see also in this reel, those images interwoven while fires are behind folks.
Yeah, Justin, I find that interesting how people are just kind of, it doesn't seem like that it's phasing them that much.
Or I had one professor that said, well, when you're catching hell every day, you know, it's not that new. So
Did you cut this?
I did move the reel further down the line a bit.
No, because there was one image of it. The image switches, whether it's an edit or not, from the front of the fencing around a tank to the street where there's fencing. And I'm wondering, did you cut that deliberately, or was this the filmmaker's attempt at creating a visual metaphor?
That's the filmmaker.
Wow. Brilliant.
It is brilliant. You're right.
Someone earlier in the chat had a question for Ashley about whether or not it was difficult to, or whether she was able to find good archival footage of the Black LGBTQ community.
Yeah, that was rather difficult. I think especially when we narrowed down the search to be Chicago specific. You know, the three sort of resources I named were the main ones we were going to, and even within the spoken word piece, you know, there's a moment where she says, you know, how Black they are, how queer they are. And I think the images we use in that moment are from the Bud Billiken parade of like young girls dancing, that I kind of was using to signify like free movement. But I think we tried a few different kind of clips in that space that could be interpreted more loosely, but unfortunately it was hard to find something specific to the Black LGBTQ community or the LGBTQ community in general when we were being specific to Chicago, which, you know, I think just goes further to show how important documentation is, like diversifying that documentation, because, you know, a lot of groups unfortunately aren't represented historically because of that gap in documentation. If anyone knows of any resources though, please do share them.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really goes back to the important work that Southside Home Movie Project is doing, and just realizing there is just this gap in what has been, sometimes what has been documented, but like more importantly, what has been collected.
Yeah.
You know, what things are available.
Yeah, I was just going to mention on the north side, Gerber Hart, but I don't know if that's mostly white LGBTQ history. There was also a documentary, Mama Gloria, that had some footage from a bar that had transgender people from the 60s, but I don't know if that was, like you said, found from some other city or just kind of juxtaposed. So I wasn't sure if it was really accurate or not.
DKs?
Oh, it might have been. Yeah. DKs, you said?
Yeah. I know.
Yeah, and no, go ahead.
I know from working with Michelle Citron on Lives Visible about the LGBT community, ranging from actually documentation from the 30s to the 80s. It was all home photography, and people were so closeted that there wasn't a whole lot of documentation. They were too scared. So it was mostly, like with Lives Visible, was mostly in people's backyards and very personal documentation. But I don't know about you know, other communities. And
where did that come from, Judy?
Pardon?
Where did that come from?
That came, and it's a strange kind of story. These two women who lived together around Summerdale and Western, they were lesbians, they were totally closeted, and but they became old and they got a friend who lived down the street to take care of him. And they died. One was buried in a pauper's grave. I mean, really tragic stuff. And they were hoarders, they were collectors, and they had tons of photos. And the friend who helped them over the years got their house and everything. So he ended up, I think, creating an archive at Gerber Hart for them. But other than that kind of story, I'm not familiar with how, I mean, I guess it's a story of archives, So, but I'm, from working on that film for several years, I'm not familiar with any ideas of how the lesbian communities and African-American neighbors was documented during those times of extraordinary repression.
There's a related question from Terry Francis, who's asking whether or not we are comfortable or uncomfortable taking footage from the South Side and using it in sort of non-location specific films. Like, it says, will Black space of the mid 20th century now be the South Side of Chicago, whether or not it means to be? I maybe didn't read that very well, but just sort of like using footage of the South Side of Chicago to generalize about the Black experience in the United States in a particular period, whether we're comfortable, uncomfortable, how we feel about it. For anybody.
I would love to hear some of the documentarians talk about that. Because for me, it's like contextual. Like if there's almost nothing that one can find, if somebody's creating a story that's about Detroit or something, Seattle, and it's helpful to try to make the visual case that, African-American families did this or that, and we have footage that reflects that in a kind of generic way, I don't think that bothers me. And it seems like documentarians have had to do that kind of, this stands for that practice a lot. And I guess you can be more or less explicit about the ways that you're doing that. At the same time, I guess we're most excited when people are really specific and intentional about the ways that they're mobilizing the material in the archive. But that's a fascinating question. I don't think it's, I can't think of like a hard and fast rule about that, just because of the dearth of material.
Do you at Southside Hope Movie Project have any sort of policies about the types of films or other projects that you would or wouldn't license to? Do you try to oversee the way the material is presented, or at least in theory? Maybe it hasn't come up in actuality.
Yeah, we talk about this all the time, like increasingly, don't we, Justin and Sabrina?
Yeah, we do.
Because more and more requests come in, and people who make commercials love to use the old home movie footage, and it's like, really. So we have conversations about every request that we get. I think that we're really, sympathetic to local filmmakers. When people have larger production budgets, we charge them a lot more to use the footage. We let the families know when their footage is being requested and used. And yeah, I mean, in every case, we have a discussion about whether or not it makes sense, whether it aligns with the values of our project.
Do families have any role in making the determination of how you license footage?
Not mostly, no. In fact, that's one of the I guess questions we ask is ourselves, is like, is this an embarrassing thing to ask a family to use their footage? Like, if we're pretty sure they would feel that it was terrible, not honoring their work, then we don't that's a reason not to use it.
And I would add in there too that where we get to a place where these films are in our archive is through a process of trust building and community building that isn't just the language of transaction of your film is now part of our archive. Thank you, goodbye, here's your copy. That is not the ethics that we're trying to practice. And in fact, we had an interesting conversation leading up to this about how some of the documentarian ethics that are embodied by projects that Contempoin has done, that's embodied in the work that Ashley is doing, you have to have that negotiation and the relationship building to determine, like, is this something that to one, honor that this person's life is precious and they're allowed their most intimate memories first and foremost. And so where does the point of access for even we could call it a greater good or a greater audience really start? It starts with a continual process of consent. We actually have one of our film donors here today, Jeanette Foreman, who can tell me if I'm doing a good job at that or not.
You really are. I'm appreciating what you're saying so much, because the you all have done such a fabulous job of balancing the idea of exposing not only our precious memories per se, but all the nuances of Black life, which is kind of like one of the goals, I'm sure, of the project, and doing it in this very nuanced way, where you have always given us the people who are the film, were subjects of the film, the greatest consideration in both enabling us to make comments like you're asking me to do now, as well as by including us in anything, some of the ideas of how you wish to do it. At the end of the day, though, I do recognize that the hard fact is that these films are donated films. And I expect that at the end of the day, if there ever was, God forbid, a conflict, I know your ethics would be that you would not want to have a conflict, and you would not have a conflict. 100 years from the day when you all are not the people that are doing this work, I'm hoping that those same ethics would apply, though, that would understand the sensibilities that you just expressed would be a part of what and how it would be administered.
Yeah. Yep. Jeanette Foreman's uncle, Robert Patton, is the one who shot the footage that we looked at earlier. So thank you, Jeanette, for being here. And Susan Ellis, another donor, was making great comments earlier. Susan.
Thank you, Jackie.
Yeah, thanks for being here.
Yeah, very much so.
And then, there's a question about the licensing fee. We don't split the licensing fee with the donors.
And the donors don't expect it.
And in part, that's a way of recognizing that the work that we're doing isn't free. Like Justin's salary is not zero. And we actually we ask people to join the archive when we're talking to the donors. I hope people feel that it's a collective effort, and that by aggregating this material, like the numbers, we have about 400 reels. It's digitized on the website at this point. It's the aggregation that calls attention to this material that creates the kind of energy and I guess attractiveness, like the more that we collect, the more eyes come to the project. So this is a project that's not only really seeking to honor the work that people are sharing with us, it's also, I hope, a way of making archival work visible, because it tends to be treated as a kind of passive, just like back end work. And it's actually incredibly laborious and time consuming and expensive. So if people are able to use the work and to share the work, then I think that helps us to create this symbiotic relationship between the people doing this preservation work and the folks who are donating the material.
Jackie?
I'd like to add another dimension to that, Jackie, because this past year, especially when you use the work and you actually it started to not just put it together with other works and so forth in a creative way, but started to put it together with music and with commentary. I'd say that it has actually become a standalone work of art almost by it within the framework of what I consider new art. I think that it deserves to be looked at in that way as well.
I agree, Jeanette. I agree. I find it interesting now because a lot of my family members always ask me, oh, can I have a picture? Can I have this? Or I want to see that. So now I can just tell them they can go to University of Chicago Southside Home Movie Project and view it. And that's an easy way for that for family members to share as well.
That's true.
Thank you, Susan.
Yeah, I think one of the things that has really always differentiated for me, Southside Home Movie Project, is your attitude towards your collections, that it is very personal, that you're creating these very close relationships and involving the donors so much. And that so much of what you do involves not just collecting the materials, digitizing them, putting them online and being done, but really connecting with communities and actively trying to get people to watch them, to share more information. And I think that's really wonderful. But I also, based on what we were talking about before, was starting to think about those questions of the future and like scalability as you continue to grow. How do you maintain that sort of same level of ethics, when you aren't able to be there anymore, or, but you being part of the University of Chicago, how do you maintain that sort of control over how the materials are handled?
Yeah, these are questions we talk about all the time, right? I guess in the immediate term, the fact that we digitize the materials for free and provide these digitized copies. So it's not just that the families can see the stuff on the website, but we'll give them, digitized copies as well. That's one way that we're not, that we're there's a kind of exchange that's happening there just at the outset. If for some reason, long after we are here, the project is continuing, I think it'll be really, I can't stipulate what people do after I'm dead and gone, but I hope that we're leaving a record of how we've been doing this. It's been interesting to me to look at, other collections, like how various film collections in different archives have been used over time. And I think, we just have to accept that it can change, probably will change, whatever kind of records we try to leave about how these things are treated. But it seems incredibly important that we're doing work of, and I think I saw a question about where we're storing the films or something. I think I saw that. University of Chicago has a film vault in the basement of the Logan Center. That's where the Film Studies Center's film collections are housed. Temperature controlled, relative humidity controlled vault was built there as a part of the construction of that building. So we're really fortunate that we could work with the Film Studies Center, and Julia Gibbs has given us space in that vault to store these films. I believe that storing those originals and putting some kind of preservation plan together for that stuff, that it will survive at all. This is the kind of stuff that typically just gets, thrown away when somebody dies. I we cannot say how people will use it, but I think that we're ensuring that at least it will last longer than, maybe this project as such does.
You
I
know,
believe that the way that the framework that has been created for this, and I'm sorry for stepping on you. I'm going to make it short. The framework that is being created for this ethical use that actually very much is defining the community in a very nuanced way, but in a way that the community itself is reflecting back that it trusts. I think that has an added value that if that will only grow, and that I think will solidify in such a way that that it's going to that is going to define the way the films can be used. That they would not be able to be used by crass commercial interests. After you get through with the way that you're presenting it and the way that you're presenting.
I was just going to say that ethics is always a bit of a balancing act. It's the same kind of thing with fair use. We live in a digital age, an image-driven age, and these images are what makes history now. It's almost like if there aren't images of it, it didn't happen. When we did 63 boycott and went out into the world, because there were those images of the boycott that hadn't been out in the world, kids are using it for the Chicago History Fair. All of a sudden, it's coming back into history. So I think it is that balancing act. Do people know about the Renzi photographs, though, that Harvard is in this lawsuit over? Harvard's archive for years was selling a few images of slaves that were taken against their will. And the family members have gone after Harvard, who's made a lot of money off of these images, and saying, hey, these are our family members. Those images should belong to us. So it's the context, and it's understanding the balance of the importance of digital, of an image, and also understanding, like Jackie says, I know sometimes I'm going to be burned over fair use, that people are going to use something from one of our films and I'm going to be really unhappy about it. But I'm glad that people can use images, that they're not locked away or lost.
So much of what you're saying, Jackie, all of you really are saying, we've been through the same kinds of ethical, moral, financial, doing the right thing at Mediaburn from the beginning. And the thing about its being there after we are gone is really important to us. So that means setting up some protocol and some paper trail of how to do it and what's right and wrong, which is easier to say than do, but you know what I'm saying?
There seems to be, this conversation seems to be very ripe right now in our, you could say 2020 moment, but I think beyond that, where, my prior experiences date back to Cartimquin as well. And the ethics, the conversations around ethics and documentary and the way that the field has changed in this past decade are really interesting. And, just a few weeks ago, I was at an archiving conference called Different Archives, Different Histories at UIC. And there's continues to be deeper, these radical ideas of can we actually do right by the communities in which we're engaging and collecting with, are now starting to actually hit the mainstream. And that gives me some hope that things can get better. Just as we're hearing land acknowledgements at the beginning of conversations, we're hearing calls for diversity and equity. These ideas are a long time coming, and we're lucky enough to have individuals, advocates, really, right, pushing for policy and at many levels to make sure that this doesn't go away. So that is my hope in this current moment. But it does really take these individual choices, these daily choices we make to really keep it alive and keep it going. And then to think of as at that end, right? Like we can start with the donation, we can think about the archives, but where does it go? What is the output, right? Like one of the reasons we're here is because of Unapologetic and the amazing work that Ashley's done. And you're collecting new film, you're recording new footage, you're asking for new footage. Like these same questions have to be coming up for you. And we're between that balance of preservation and commodification. And I'm just curious, and trust and exploitation, you know, and name it all. Like, what, do you want to share a little bit about?
That was real smooth how you passed it over to me. No, but I mean, that's certainly something that I think about a lot in my practice, because, you know, there was a certain point, even when I was filming with Unapologetic, that I felt like I was just gathering for the sake of gathering versus towards, you know, a goal or purpose. And especially this summer, as we saw another uprising with the movement for Black Lives, you know, I really intentionally kind of took a step back from that documentation, because, you know, previously it was very much so in service of my film or in service of, you know, what the work that organizers were doing. But I feel like there's a lot of image gathering that happens in protest space because of the beauty of the aesthetic or of the flashiness of it. But then it never reaches the people that it'll most positively impact. So that I really tried to push that conversation this summer with people when they were going out and filming in the streets. Like, are you doing this just to add it to your portfolio or your reel? Or are you in conversation with the people that have organized this event and spent time on it to see if it can serve them in a higher way, or if you have a project, you know, that it's gonna lead towards that purpose. And if it's just, you know, for the purpose of archival, I think that's totally okay. But you need to have a plan around that. And, you know, even, you know, I'm in the process of figuring out, like, for the footage that we didn't use for Unapologetic, how we're going to archive that, because there's a lot of events and protests and direct actions that happened that I know one day somebody might, you know, see a use for. So, yeah, I really think that needs to be a constant conversation you're having. You know, it does not even just around, you know, the movement for Black Lives, any type of projects. I think thinking about the archival and its long-term existence within the film space, you know, really gives it value beyond just, you know, the distribution life of your film.
I think
Go ahead, Judy.
I was saying, it's really interesting because this conversation seems to, in some way, about archives and how we shoot today, go back to the early days of documentary and the reasons for making them and how to deal with the ethics. I think we're at a somewhat new moment, like at the beginning of, you know, say Grierson's documentaries in the 30s, that archives are somewhat new, particularly our current contribution to archives. And there's lots of ethical issues that need to be thought about. I know when I was shooting stuff in the 70s that it's now, whether Cartemquin's or Media Burns archive, I never thought that this stuff would be important 50 years later, or that I was shooting a doctor's strike at Cook County Hospital, and I'm interviewing some person who goes on to be, you know, somewhat a remarkable character. So it's a different kind of realization, I think, of how we shoot now and how we have to negotiate. Clearly, we always had to negotiate ethics, but I think it's different now because we realize that there's a longevity to this work. So that's all. And with archives, I mean, I applaud Ashley for her brilliant film and her rigor in researching, and encourage people to contribute to Media Burn to continue to have events like this, but also to think about the idea of the longevity of these archives and of our own work that we're producing and how we want them utilized. And, to try and get over the founders syndrome that there's this kind of, we're going to be taken care of by the archive, when in fact it's we who need to take care of the archives. So much for my spiel. Donate to Media.
Thank you, Judy. Judy is one of our wonderful board members. And I wanted to highlight this question from Paula Ahmad because it was so great. It's for Ashley, and she would like to learn more about whether and how the politics and aesthetics of joy are at play for you when you're researching in the archive. Sorry, I gotta move my cat. Often working in an archive can be one part boredom, one part radical joy. And I wonder how joy / pleasure / the unexpected pops up for you as a researcher / filmmaker in an archive. And if so, if then it translates into the final film, which she can't wait to see.
That's a great question. I think that when I was viewing this stuff in these different within these different archives, I really tried to view them in a similar fashion that I did like the footage, I guess like the contemporary footage for the film, in the sense that I really just kind of tried to note to myself like the moments that I was drawn towards versus the ones that didn't affect me as much. I think in large part something that surprised me, and something that Jackie was talking about earlier, is just like how with the Southside Home Movie Project, like these are not people that these are not your families or your personal memories. But I think that especially within the Black experience, there's just so many overlapping moments that I was able to see myself in, or my family members in, or like, my dad was like the camera person when I was growing up, and like it was shot in a similar kind of fashion that my dad would shoot it. And I always would kind of just gravitate towards that because it just reminded me of like my home and family. Or like I was saying earlier with the West Side footage, like I was just so captivated because there's not a lot of, or in my research, I wasn't able to find a lot of footage of Black people on the West Side of Chicago during that time. There was also a lot of boredom, and there was also a lot of like me just skipping through sections that I felt didn't apply. But I tried to treat it as a living process, just like I would, the footage that we shot, because I think, as everyone was speaking to, like it holds just as much, value and memory as something else may, as something more contemporary might, regardless of how it's shot or who shot it, just because of the value of the experience. And I knew that Black joy was a really big part of that. So I tried to just gravitate towards moments that made me feel joy or happy when I was researching. I don't know if that was kind of an amalgamation of words, but.
I think that beautifully just like covers what's so special about home movies and moving images in general. It's just that Jackie was saying this earlier, but sometimes just looking at like someone's couch or like the soda bottle that they had from the past, it just like really connects you to the past in this like visceral way that maybe something written wouldn't. You can just recognize that similarity. We don't usually see inside each other's homes. And so I think when you can see someone who lives in a totally different place from you or whatever, and see that similarity in their homes, that, oh yeah, their dad is doing the filming, and their Christmas tree looks the same, and like, they got the same toys or whatever.
And I also think, just to add briefly to that, I think I was also in a headspace, when we were making Unapologetic, I felt like there was so much visibility in the media of like Black trauma and Black death, and these sensationalized images of protest, and you know, that was a huge impetus for the film, is we wanted to have a deeper look of the other side of things, because, you know, Black people aren't always dying or in pain or out in protest. Like, they do a lot of other things. They go home to their families, they cook, they have picnics. And so it was just really rewarding to know that, you know, I mean, I knew it existed because I come from a family of Black people, but like, it was just beautiful to see it on camera that, you know, there's so much that we can gain from these images of people just living their lives. And, you know, that can hold just as much significance as to some people a body camera could of someone being killed. So we really wanted to move away from that imaging because I felt like it was already so present in the mainstream media. In the archive was just so useful in that effort.
If you think about now and the hundreds of thousands of minutes and hours that people have done on their cell phones in the last 10 years, what's going to happen to that? And where's most of it? Nobody's ever going to see. So, I mean, this is moving. It's not going backwards. It's going forwards in a way. And that's important because it's just as gritty and real and, you know, parts of people's lives is all the stuff we did whenever we did it, and you know, your relatives did it whenever they did it. So I don't know. It's not going to get less complicated.
I wanted to add too. This is kind of spanned the different aspects of my work, but we, at least personally, I'm in the business of living and expressing healthier narratives about our communities. And so if we only think of the past as having a certain set of images that are perhaps traumatic to some or to collectively, then we're missing the insights that we can gain from that time, from those people. And so we have to integrate the story. We have to integrate the images. And your reaction, Ashley, is, I think every artist with Spinning Home Movies has had that exact reaction. They're like, I knew they had to have joy, but to see it, it really puts it back together. It allows the restitching, the remembering to happen, which is necessary for us to even claim the joy, the beauty of the South Side, right? Because even that has a collective trauma to it too, as people are being displaced, as neighborhoods are gentrified. But the feeling of not wanting to leave and to not be pushed out is completely related to these images.
I like that, Justin. I like that we're able to show sides of life that maybe people would never know, that we're just like everybody else, and we have joy. We go swimming. We may have summer houses. We have cars. We dress up. We're stylish. I like that we're showing sides of life that people don't know that or wouldn't even realize, because they always see the trauma that most in the African Americans experienced in the past, and that's shown in the media. But now you see, like you said, you see the joy. You see the weddings and the elaborate Easter parade dressing or something like that.
I just wanted to throw in quickly that sometimes people ask us if we're collecting videotape, and right now we're not, because we don't have the equipment or the capacity to deal with that volume of material. And Tom, you fast forwarded to like the cell phone footage. I mean, the proliferation of material over time, it is like a daunting task to think about how the changes in medium, and then like the increase in like memory and bandwidth that people have to document stuff, what that means on the archival end of things. I mean, it's a big conundrum. And I'm thinking back to Paula's question, like I spent last summer at the National Museum of African American History and Culture, because they have a large scale home movie and home video project called the Great Migration Project. And so I just sat and watched everything that they've collected up to this point. And because I've been collecting film, which means it's a particular time period. It means the reels have a certain way.
You spelled it wrong. It's unapologetic.
It means that people are being really selective about what they shoot. So, getting stuff when the light's going to be good. And there's more instruction, kind of obviously, when people are dealing with their kids, like, okay, hold the toy up, because I'm just going to shoot you for a little bit and then go to another thing, as opposed to when we get to videotape and you can just set the camera up and film videotape all of Christmas morning. So when we talk about the dynamic of like boredom and joy, I watched this woman get her afro shaped up when she came home from college. She was going to Grinnell. She went back home to Mississippi. She sets up the camera and she goes to the barber, and it's just the blowout, the cut, and their conversation and people who come in and out. It was sublime, but I don't know how, to go through that level of detail and the amount of tapes that people had and so forth. I mean, it's fascinating to me to think about some of these logistical and ethical questions. But also the ways that the narrative that we get in home, documentation or amateur kind of everyday media making just really changes as the media change. Because again, once you get to the camcorder and beyond, it's not just a middle class story.
It's more than that, Jackie.
Yeah.
And it's not just about class, it's about power in some ways. When it was, if you look at, and I would suggest people look at Michelle Citrin's home movies and other fictions, if it was silent film, it was usually the patriarch of the family shooting the family, and it was always happy situations.
That's right.
And it was always a gloss of what a typical family might do, whether it's vacations or birthdays. And somehow we imbue this as reality.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not. These are fictions.
Yeah. It's performative.
It's totally performative and usually shot by a man. I think you're right in that there's a huge change when the technology changes and we get videotape, because then it's like kids can pick up the camera and shoot, so that there's and we have audio, which
That's
is
what I
very
did, Judy. That's how I started filming. Because
my dad
got a nicer camcorder, and I didn't want him to just be the one documenting, so I would take it from him and walk around and film things.
There you go. So a power shift, right? And I'm sure a content shift as well, Ashley, given what you would shoot.
Oh,
no?
yes, absolutely. I was running around with my cousins. It was not interesting to him, but to me, it was something that I, years later, have looked back on and really value.
I'm jumping again, Jackie, but it seems as if there's so much stuff that there has to be some discipline, some ways, some curation that has to happen to make it accessible. And that's a huge piece of the puzzle, I think, as we go forward. It's always been a problem, but a challenge, but it's going to be even more so.
Great. I agree. And then the question becomes, is it worth it to just collect the material and then figure out how it would be processed and described and shared eventually? Or we've been trying to create accessibility as quickly as we can. But when I think about the ways that the time period of documentation of the South Side could increase with the collection of videotape, the class dimension I mentioned before, but then also, as Judy is pointing to, then you get footage that's shot by kids and shot by, anybody in the family and so forth. is it worth just taking that stuff now and then figuring out what to do with it later? And I kind of lean in that direction.
I was gonna add too, there's some of these, there's the challenges that I think Judy mentioned and others have mentioned around like the sustainability of archives. And I think that's also figured into these questions of what to broach next. We have been lucky, you know, to have 15 years. You know, Jackie's had 15 years to with Southside Home Movie Project. You know, I remember you were working on this film, what, 6 years ago, Ashley? Like you had the time to find the stories and to follow them. There's so much of this that is a time element that we need to also create the art and preserve the art that we care about, that is attached to funding, you know, unfortunately in this capitalistic world. And so there have been some models to try to, at least with the archiving side, to think about how hard it is to necessarily sustain an individual archive, and also the power dynamics that come with that around what to take and what not to take. That some community archiving projects, there's a movement of that happening, including, you know, public access to digitization. I saw that Siobhan was here briefly, and is founder of the Memory Lab Network. So there are ways in which that power is being given and shared. Does it mean that the cataloging, the collection is happening? Maybe not. And maybe there's opportunities to think about what does a community archive look like and is shared by an institution that's not a university, or an institution that's not a nonprofit, whatever, you know, more radical ways of thinking about how do we collect, you know, what we cherish. So I just offer that as a point of view too.
I think that's a really nice closing thought. I think we could all talk about archives and filmmaking and representation all night long, but I think this is a good place for us to like stop and go to bed and rest. But thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. It was such an honor to have Jackie and Justin and Ashley and Sabrina in the background joining us tonight. Thank you so much to Tice, who handled all of the technical aspects, made sure the screening went well. Can't thank him enough. And we hope you can all join us again in the future. And just thank you so much for being part of this really rich conversation. I enjoyed it so much. So thank you all and have a good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.